Hello, this is Jennifer and Miss Heather from the Hagerstown Library, and we're here today to talk to you about ocean lore, our last class for this year's summer reading program, which actually wrapped up on Saturday. But we wanted to squeeze in this last topic that we said that we would talk about. Today we're going to talk about creatures, legends, and stories of water bodies and landlocked water. For this, we're going to include lakes, ponds, rivers, and streams specifically, the landlocked sources of water that often have a lot of stories attributed to them about things that happen around the water or things that live in the water, especially. And a water body is any type of significant accumulation of water from a large puddle up. And this does include the ocean, but we covered those last week. So this week we're going to talk about smaller areas and the things associated with them. And while we talk about the things from every corner, while we could talk about things from every corner of the world, we're just going to focus on two regions. We're going to focus on North America and Europe and speak about some of our personal favorite things in those areas, because there are just too many and we could talk about this for hours and hours and hours. So we're going to talk about North America first.
Yes.
North America, as most of us know, is a continent full of lakes, rivers, ponds, and streams. And early Native Americans had a lot of stories about things that spent time in and around the water. The first thing we're going to talk about is the water baby. Water babies are mysterious and dangerous water spirits from the folklore of California and other Western Native American tribes. Water babies are said to inhabit fresh springs and sometimes ponds or streams. Water babies usually take the form of beautiful human infants, but in some tribes they have fish tails or appear to be reptilian beings that when they cry they sound like human babies. In many tribal traditions, the cry of a water baby is an omen of death, and in others, responding to a water baby's crying by picking it up can result in a catastrophe.
So the next one we have is Mishu Pishu, or the Great Lakes. Now this is from the Great Lakes. Mishu Pishu is an Ojibwe water creature, also known as the underwater panther, or in direct translation, the Great Lynx. The creature is also affiliated with Algonquin, Ottawa, Menominee, Shawnee, and Cree tribes. Mishu Pishu dwells in the depths of Lake Superior, the largest, cleanest, and wildest of the Great Lakes. In terms of surface area, Lake Superior is the biggest lake in the world. Mishu Pishu is said to live near Michipicoten and Minitolan Island in Lake Superior, and is often regarded as a symbol of the lake's power. Mishu Pishu can cause storms, waves, and whirlpools. The water spirit travels through underwater tunnels, speaking in roaring hiss that sounds like rushing water. Mishu Pishu is a amalgamation of many different animal parts, so that means like multiple types of animals. So sort of like Frankenstein's monster of all animals you might find in the Great Lakes region, which is very, very varied, for the lack of better words. Some say Mishu Pishu has the head and paws of an enormous cat, the horns of a bison, and a scaly body of a snake or a feathered body of a bird. Just depends on the tribe and the area. A spiky back and tail, and other number of contrasting characteristics. Some say he's about the size of a lynx or a mountain lion. Others say he is unfathomably large. Mishu Pishu is usually considered a malevolent being. The creature passes the time by causing death and misfortune for those who awaken his fury, guarding copper on the Michipicoten Island. It's a weird name, sorry if I butchered it. And generating powerful storms.
The next one I'm going to mention is the Oniari, which is an ancient water spirit of the Great Lakes. First Nation groups in the Lake Erie region, particularly the Iroquois tribes, would speak of the Oniari, a water spirit that lives in the Great Lakes. The name is the Mohawk word for snake. Oniari is a horned, dragon-like snake that breathes poison and fire and is said to capsize canoes and devour humans, though the creature will sometimes spare travelers who make a great enough offering to it.
Yes. So the next part of this, we're going to go travel more to the southeast part of America, North America, to the Tennessee and Carolinas. So this is something a man that I'm going to tell you about actually witnessed on doing research in that area. So it's called the Cherokee Water Ritual. When anthropologist James Mooney published his first of his influential studies of the Native American culture in 1888, Myths of the Cherokee, he was struck by the centrality of water in the Cherokee world. Mooney has spent a season living with the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians in the Great Smoky Mountains of North Carolina. In the following years, he published several foundational books on the Cherokee culture and became, according to Dwellin Museum, Archibald, director of the American Indian Program at the National Museum of Natural History. That's a lot. The first person to write Indian history with Indian thoughts about their history incorporated into work, which is really rare because it was usually just a white man's perspective of everything and didn't take consideration of what the natives felt and believed. Water, Mooney discovered during his season when the Eastern Band appeared at the very beginning of Cherokee cosmology. In Myths of the Cherokee, published in the Journal of American Folklore, he recorded the nation's origin story in which Cherokee conceived of the earth as a great island floating in a sea of water and suspended at each of the 4 cardinal points by a cord hanging down from the sky vault. When the world grows old and worn out, the people will die and the cords will break and let the earth sink down into the ocean, and all will be water again. We begin in water and we return to water. In daily life, the Cherokee acknowledge the spiritual significance of their local rivers, streams, ponds, with a ritual called going to water. Each morning at daybreak, Mooney wrote, a party of Cherokee would be led by a healer down a running stream where the group would face the rising sun and immerse themselves completely in the flowing water, enacting the kind of rebirth. The ceremony of communion touched on nearly all spheres of social life. Going to water, Mooney concluded, was a part of a ritual of attaining long life, for winning affections of women, for recovering from a wasting sickness, and for calling down prosperity upon the family at each return of the new moon. So the next one I'm going to have, because we decided to trade things. This is called about evil water spirits. It is a Native American story that I thought was very interesting. So let's get into it. Where did the big and ugly fishes and snakes that swim in the water come from? The Indians know. From their forefathers comes this story. A long time ago, before the Great Father had finished putting all kinds of fish into the rivers and shady streams, there was an Indian woman who was blessed with twins. This Indian woman was a very proud mother, for her 2 little brown, black-eyed babies were good to look at, and they had good tempers, and because of it, the women in the tribe also wished they might have twin babies. It was in the springtime, and the little twins were about 4 years old when they began to tire of staying in their mother's wigwam. Their mother one day had gone with the other women of the tribe to pick wild berries that grow in the woods and around the briar patches. Some of these berries the Indians ate as soon as they picked them, but others were dried and stored to eat in the winter. When a blanket of frost covered the field and woods, a few birds and bees could be found. The mother had left the little children with their grandmother, which is really common. A whole tribe raises each other's children in Native American culture. At that time, the old woman was very wrinkled and weak, and sleep comes easily to such people whose eyes were made heavy. I did not write this, so you can't come after me for the description of an old person. And tired with the weight of many years of hard work and troubles, lying down on a deerskin inside the wigwam, the grandmother began to watch the twins as they played near at hand just outside the door. The day was warm. Even the locusts in the treetops sang lazy, sleepy songs, and the breeze that moved the leafy limbs on the trees whispered softly. The old grandmother began to nod. Her head sank upon her arm. Without knowing it, she fell asleep in the wigwam. When the twins saw their grandmother was asleep, they put their heads together and whispered, "Here's a fine chance to slip off and do something they wanted to do for a long time." It was to do something they had watched grown-up Indians do in the bayou that ran along the edge of the camp. The Indians waded in the bayou in its banks and bent down in the shallow water to dig it up with their hands, the tender roots of the plants called yoncopins, whose broad green leaves lift well above the surface of the bayou. These roots were good to eat. The little twins had seen the Indians gathering them and wanted to go gather them too. Now their mother was away and their grandmother was asleep, and they had a chance to do it. Without a word, they slipped away into the wigwam when nobody was looking, and they ran without making a noise with their little buckskin moccasins along a grassy path that led towards the bayou. And now they were standing on the brink of a shallow place where a tongue of the bayou ran back into the low place on the banks. Everything was still and high, among the high reeds that grew on the banks and leaned over the water. The twins looked. They could see the bottom of the weeds growing on it. What was in the weeds? They had been told. What was in the weeds? They had been told that the evil spirits were there. For she wanted to frighten them so they could not go near the bayou and be drowned. But they saw nothing, and they waded in hand. They saw the broad green pads or leaves of lily plants floating in a little way from the bank, and they knew that the roots were underneath, growing in the soft mud. Carefully they waded towards them. The water rose to their knees. They were not afraid because they had not found the evil spirits their mother had told them about. They waded farther. The water was up to their waists. Now they were among the lily pads, and long stems of plants slipped against the brown bodies and tickled them. Here was a place to feel around at the bottom for the roots. The little boy and girl bent over and stretched their short arms down to the water around their feet. They had to bend until their chins were in the water and all their bodies and heads were beneath the surface. But they still were not afraid because not even yet had they seen the evil spirits their mother had told them that were there. It was so nice to be feeling with the fingers in the cool mud. The weeds growing on the bottom tickled their toes, and the leaves of the lily pads rubbed against their faces. But just then, when everything seemed so easy and beautiful, something happened. In pulling a root from one of the twins, suddenly slipped and fell. He went head underwater. Then she became frightened, and with a scared cry, she caught at her brother and pulled him in too. The evil spirits seemed to have them now. The lily stems wound around their bodies as they struggled. The warm water filled their open mouths as they tried to call for mother. They tried to get out of the clinging lily stems, but they only slipped deeper into what became wrapped tighter, and the stems were like ropes. They could not call for their mother with their mouths filling with water. They could not get back to the bank, for their heads were underwater, and they could not reach the bottom anymore. The bright sun faded out swiftly. The songs of the birds were heard no more. The muddy water blinded their eyes, and everything became dark. Poor little Indian twins. The evil water spirits they could not see had trapped them. After a while, the Indians came and found the children lying in each other's arms in the shallow water. They could not hear their poor mother wailing, nor did they hear their old grandmother moaning and swinging to and fro in her sorrow. They could not see their father as he stood tall and still looking down on them on the bank, while he sternly kept the grief of a father's heart from showing in a warrior's face. That night, while the mother was sitting beside her twins for the last time, watching over their bodies before they could be buried with their toys in the earth, she asked the Great Spirit to grant her a wish. For the sake of other babies of the tribe, she asked that evil spirits of the water be given shapes so they could be seen, so that the other babies would see them in the water and be frightened away from them. The Great Spirit granted the wish of the unselfish mother. He gave those evil spirits the shapes all men fear, the shapes of the alligator, the snapping turtle, the garfish, and the rows of wicked teeth. The snake is known as the water moccasin. From that time, the little Indian boys and girls could see those evil spirits and keep away from them.
After that, we're going to move to some other stories and lore about places in North America that have been more modern, more recent. First thing we're going to talk about is the Cornelia B. The Cornelia B is a ship. We talked last time about ghost ships of the ocean. Well, there are some lakes that are also believed to be haunted by ghost ships, especially the Great Lakes. Among those is the Cornelia B. The Cornelia B was lost in November of 1875 and vanished without a trace on Lake Huron. The ship and all 9 men aboard disappeared and became a legendary ghost ship, at least until the modern divers found the wreck in 1986. It was discovered sitting upright in 185 feet of water in Lake Huron. The ship is frozen in time by cold, fresh water, with its masts still standing and the crew's lifeboat resting silently on the lake bottom nearby. The Cornelia B. Windiet is a dramatic reminder of the dangers of late-season travel on the Great Lakes. And I have a picture. This is a picture from divers that located the wreckage of the Cornelia B. And this picture shows the lifeboat that's resting on the bottom right next to the hull of the ship. And that is an actual photograph taken by a diver.
Okay, the next one we have is W.H. Glitcher, right? Glitcher, okay. Make sure I read that right. There was some excitement when the WH Glitcher was built in Cleveland in 1891 because the Glitcher was piloting an experimental steel hull. Of course, that excitement wouldn't last very long. A year after it was built, the Glitcher, while carrying a cargo of coal from Buffalo, New York to Milwaukee, the ship entered a big cloud of fog while sailing through the Straits of the Mackinac. No one aboard the ship could be seen or heard from again. To this date, the WH Glitcher has never been discovered, and it remains the largest unidentified shipwreck in Lake Michigan. But the Glitcher can supposedly be seen through the fog of Mackinac Island, as it appeared in 1892 when the sunlight pierces the fog. Captain Weeks is at the wheel, and the sound of the fog whistle echoes across the waves. So this is a artist rendering or drawing of the WH Glitcher. Okay, the next we have, I'm so excited for, is the Beast of Busco. This is actually from a town called Churubusco, and it's in northern Indiana. It's one of my favorite places to visit. So let's get into it. So legendary sea monsters have been told of all the corners of the world. We're going to just cover a couple. So the Beast of Busco was a massive common snapping turtle spotted in 1898 by Oscar Folk, who saw the creature in a 7-acre lake on his farm in Folk Lake in Churubusco, Indiana, or they call it Busco for short as well. Despite having an estimated weight of 500 pounds, the Beast of Busco did not grab attention when it was originally sighted. So, 50 years later, locals saw the creature as they were fishing in the same lake. This report gathered national attention, spurring a massive search for the beast. In one attempt to capture the Beast of Busco, over 100 people claimed to have seen the gigantic turtle. So, the farmer who owned the property in the Beast of Busco purportedly inhabited became fixated on finding the monster using traps and scuba divers initially. Later attempts were made to drain the lake to no avail. The search was given up, and the creature had not been reported since. Some theorize the Beast of Busco was actually an alligator snapping turtle who had migrated north in its old age. Alligator snapping turtles are known to surpass 200 pounds, not dollars, 200 pounds, but are usually found south of Indiana. So this is a rendering or a drawing of the Beast of Busco, to give you more of a lifelike characteristics. Actually, the town of Churubusco, they do a lot of things. They are called Turtle Town USA, and they have like a turtle festival every year, and they have like on the outskirts of town there is a turtle. It's not necessarily, it doesn't really look like a snapping turtle, but it is a turtle statue, and it says "Welcome to Churubusco, Turtle Town USA." That I have frequently visited. Jennifer said she's been there, and it's a really cool little town just for that little legend that they have up there.
All the way in Indiana.
Yep.
The next one we're going to talk about is another one that has been embraced by the people who've discovered it. Mm-hmm. Chessy is probably the most famous lake monster in North America. Chessy is described as a black serpentine monster roughly 20 to 30 feet long with a football-shaped head or horse-like head. There's a couple different accountings. The creature was originally spotted in the Chesapeake Bay in 1936 by a military helicopter, but then it began being spotted frequently through the 70s and 80s and 90s. Chessy has since been reported sporadically through the years, as recently as 2014. Although sightings of it were originally met with fear or awe, Chessy has become an environmental icon in its native Maryland. It has been used in coloring books by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, as well as in articles and the government publications on environmental issues. Chessy is beloved by the locals and has been used as the mascot for Little League teams, inspirations for costumes, and even a namesake for a manatee rescued in 1994. So this is something that was put out, that is a book about Chessy, that is the Chesapeake Bay story. With a little cartoon Chessy there, you can see.
Very neat. So now we're going to travel across the pond to Europe. So we're going to go and talk about one of the most famous
lake monsters,
Nessie, the Loch Ness Monster. So if you've never heard the world before
Word before, sorry.
Before, a loch is a Scottish Gaelic word for sea, and the Loch Ness Monster is probably the most famous sea monster in the world. The Loch Ness Monster, affectionately known as Nessie, is a creature in Scottish folklore that is said to inhabit the Loch Ness in the Scottish Highlands. It is often described as large, long-necked, with one or more humps protruding from the water. Popular interest and belief in the creature has varied since it was brought to worldwide attention in 1933. But the earliest accounts of the creature date back to the 6th century when an Irish monk is said to have held the creature at bay, preventing him from attacking a swimmer, with the power and prayer of God. There were many legends and cautionary tales of a creature in the loch and a attached river in the early 1900s. It became quite popular after mass publications spread the tales and supposedly photographic proof around the world. So this is like the most infamous picture of Nessie. It is from a surgeon, and it has actually been debunked several different times, and even his family's come out like, no, he faked the whole thing. But it's still fun to talk about it, and cryptozoology still is trying to figure it out. So it's very interesting.
When he originally released the photographs, he refused to put his name on them because he didn't want the notoriety and attention, but they knew it was a doctor, so they called the collection of photographs he released the surgeon's photos. The next thing we're going to talk about is from Scandinavian mythology. The Foss Grimm. Foss Grimm was a water spirit that played enchanted songs on the violin, luring women and children to drown in lakes and streams. However, in some stories, he is depicted as a harmless creature who is simply wanting to entertain men, women, and children with his songs. According to myths, Foss Grimm even agreed to live with a human that fell in love with him once, but he supposedly left after some time because he could not live away from a water source for very long.
Very interesting. The next one is Melusine. Last time we discovered mermaids of the ocean. Well, Melusine was a feminine spirit of fresh water in the sacred springs and rivers in European mythology. She is usually depicted as a kind of mermaid and may even have wings in some pictures. One story tells us she was born to the fae Presine and a common man and taken to the Isle of Avalon, where she was able to grow up there. When she heard of her human father betraying her mother, she sought revenge on him. Her mother heard of this and cursed her to look like a serpent from the waist down. She supposedly got scaled arms and fins for hands and could never change back to her old form.
Sad ending.
Very.
The last thing that we're going to talk about is actually my favorite water-associated legend. Elaine of Astolat, also known as the Lady of Shalott. There are a lot of legends and stories about the region in Britain where King Arthur reigned and at the Isle of Avalon. A personal favorite of mine is the legend of a woman named Elaine of Astolat. It's a tongue twister.
It is.
The original version of this story appears in the 13th century French romantic poem Mort Arthur, in which the Lady of Astolat, which I'm not going to pronounce it in French, dies of unrequited love for Lancelot and drifts down a river to Camelot in a boat. More versions of this legend came about through the 13th century, and then 2 versions of this legend were written into poems by Lord Alfred Tennyson in the 19th century called The Lady of Shalott. The legend goes that an immortal woman lived in a tall tower in the middle of a river not far from Avalon. She sat by a mirror where she would watch the world pass as time went by, in the reflection weaving a tapestry that told the story of the world outside of her tower. For as long as she would never look away from the mirror or see the actual view out of her window, she would live forever. But then one day Sir Lancelot rode by her window and was reflected upon her mirror. He was so beautiful that she immediately stood up from the mirror and turned to look at him directly. As soon as she did this, a curse came upon her, and she knew she was going to die. So she came down from her tower and got into a boat at the base of the tower and began to float down the river to Camelot, dying en route. The boat came upon the shore in front of Sir Lancelot, and looking upon her, he declared her to be the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. And this is what we call a tragic romance. But the stories of Avalon have a lot of that. They're not happy ending stories. And a lot of the legends of Arthur and the people in his court have to do with rivers and seas around him. After all, it was the Lady of the Lake who made him the king.
Exactly.
So now we've covered a whole variety of legends and monsters from landlocked water bodies, but we know we certainly didn't cover everything. Did we miss any of your favorites? Leave us a comment and let us know. Maybe down the road we'll do more of these. And thank you for joining us for these special ocean lore classes, and we hope you've had as much fun as we have.
All right, we'll see you guys later.
Bye.
Enjoy.